Hello BookTube and other super friends. So it's October, which means there's at least 2 super duper events running concurrently. It's Victober, the massive celebration of Victorian literature that originates with Katie at Books and Things, and it's also Occult Detective October, devised by MJ, Reading This Life. I'm participating in both of those, and they both got some big chunky reads, but they're not quite ready yet. So there's things that are going to get their own videos or at least a wrap up. So still doing the sort of substantial parts of those events, but in the meantime, here's a few other things I've been reading. So I opened up this newly published Ghost Stories of Wilkie Collins because I figured there would be some Wilkie Collins stories inside it. Not much gets past me. So there's a prompt in Victober.
It's true, doesn't.
One of those is like group challenge, which is to honour the memory of Jennifer Brooks, and Wilkie Collins being one of her favourite writers. Read something by Wilkie Collins is a prompt there. I'm actually reading a Wilkie Collins novel, but like I say, finish it first, big video. I thought you can never have enough Wilkie, so the one I decided to read, it's a great collection. I mean, it looks nice, informative introduction and a bunch of stories. I read one called The Dead Hand, which is described as an anti-ghost story. It's has a great setup, which is something that's probably quite relatable really. A guy turns up in a town he's visiting, Doncaster. It's race day, or racing weekend, horse racing, which means there's no accommodation. Same thing happened to us with the Great North Run.
Which wasn't horses.
Not horses, it's people.
Or dogs.
No,
but
but
it was people.
Still meant you couldn't lay your head anywhere. Anyway, yes, this means he ends up in a very low sort of inn. Often a feature of stories, the sort of dodgy inn, and he's basically said, well, there is a room, you can have it, but once you've paid, there's no backing out. And it turns out the catch is that you've got to share. Okay, got to share, that's fine. But the detail that hasn't been quite explained fully is that he's got to share with someone who died that afternoon. So basically,
sorry, that's not.
It's a room with 2 beds. One's got a corpse in it. He's paid his money. There's nowhere else to stay, and he decides to tough it out. That's the setup. That's pretty spooky, but that's like the beginning, and then lots of other things happen. So yeah, pretty good Wilkie Collins story from 1857. So well in the Victober area. So the Dead Hand area. What's an area?
It's shorter than an earring.
Having read one story with hand in the title, I thought, let's have a read of The Red Hand by Arthur Machen. So fast forwarding quite a lot to 1895. So Arthur Machen, real majorly important writer of supernatural tales. This collection, the Dyson Chronicles, brings together all of his stories featuring a particular character called Dyson, who one could call an occult detective. Bit of a sort of a prototype occult detective, but that's basically what he is. He figures out things in his own unique way. So now I'm doing double duty now, hitting a prompt for the Occult Detective October, and still in Victorian times. So this Red Hand story is great. I mean, I thoroughly recommend basically all of Machen, all of the Dyson stories. Probably if you're only going to read one, I'd actually probably start with the Great God Pan, which is not one of those. But yes, this is good. You got a sort of, it's set in London, and the sort of depiction of the city is very much a Machen thing. And Dyson, he's not like a detective in the sort of step into my waiting room kind of thing. He's an antiquarian, a kind of flaneur, and his process for figuring things out seems to involve roaming the streets of London and sort of waiting for things to happen. So it's kind of slightly offbeat just in the way the whole thing works. So him and his mate are puzzling over some ancient artifacts like arrowheads and stuff like that. And interestingly, the idea of the sort of primitive humans and sort of ancient humanity is seen as something that's quite horrific. And I think this might have been like a thing of the times, you know. So it was 1895, the idea of evolution's floating around. And I think one of the sort of views on that was, oh, well, if it can go forwards and progress, it can also go backwards. And maybe we're poised, you know, maybe we're, you know, one or two accidents away from sinking back into the morass of the darkness of ancient times. And there's this idea that, well, there could be these sort of primitive humans could be wandering around now. And as if to prove that point, someone's murdered with a flint knife, and there's a weird occult symbol of a red hand. I think it's like this. On the wall near where it happened. So that's the sort of inciting incident, and it connects ancient tumuli out in Wales with the modern metropolis. They're sort of interwoven. Folks reading the latest Alan Moore London book, I think it's called The Great Wen, Machen in this kind of thing is something that feeds into that, one of the many sort of ideas and influences that Alan Moore has worked with. So yeah, great story. So we've had a dead hand and a red hand, keeping the momentum going. I found The Brown Hand, a story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The story of The Brown Hand. Arthur Conan Doyle is in Ghostly Clients and Demonic Culprits, The Roots of Occult Detective Fiction, edited by Tim Prasil. So Tim Prasil's idea is that occult detective genre doesn't like start overnight with a particular set of stories at the end of the 19th century. There are lots and lots of sort of basically examples from loads earlier. So this is a good book to get if you're interested in that kind of thing. Obviously I'm riding both horses of the BookTube events. So this Brown Hand, now is it sort of Wiltshire? Wherever it's set in, yeah, Wiltshire, that's described as having lots of sort of primitive artefacts around. So I thought, oh, it's great, it's going to be the same sort of idea. But we sort of leave that behind, and it's more of a, what I've read described as reverse colonialism, where the supernatural thing comes from the colonies, in this case India. So a guy who's lived his life in India, been a doctor there, retires to the UK, but he's brought this ghostly thing with him. And it's fine. It's maybe not, I didn't find it a particularly spooky story. It resolves in quite a neat way. Interesting though, because Arthur Conan Doyle, himself a spiritualist, so he was part of that belief system of the time, that there's been this breakthrough that we can now communicate with the dead, that the afterlife is like this sort of thing we can understand and so on. And he'd actually himself been in a psychic research exploration of a haunted house. Sherlock Holmes, however, his most famous character, sort of doesn't believe in any of that. So here we have a character called Dr. Hardacre who does. So Conan Doyle's kind of doing his own actual thing. So yeah, Brown Hand, pretty good. Just thought I'd keep the handball rolling. LT Meade.
Read Meade.
Read Meade indeed.
Read Meade.
She has a story called The Dead Hand. Again. So this is from... Well, it is. It's a half a century of hands. That's my link. As people will already know if they've seen the video. Yeah, LT Meade and Robert Eustace.
Sorry.
LT Meade and Robert Eustace in the Eyes of Terror collection, which is really good. This is I think the first story about Diana Marburg. My name is Diana Marburg. I am a palmist by profession. Occult phenomena, spiritualism, clairvoyance, and many other strange mysteries of the unseen world have from my earliest years excited my keen interest. So, Diana Marburg, an occult detective, one of the first female ones, and one of the first to be written by a woman. And so Meade and Eustace also wrote the John Bell series, which is of getting to the video about that soon. But unlike John Bell, Diana Marburg believes in and she has kind of psychic powers of clairvoyance. And we get a story where she reads a guy's palm and she knows that he's going to commit a murder. And then it's like how that unfolds and how she ends up solving the murder. So it's fine. I think Marburg is one of those characters where the stories are so short that she's a little bit sketched in, but sort of loads of material for people to maybe revisit in rewriting pastiches and so on. So 1902, we've edged out of the Victorian era, which is a shame, although it was published in the Strand and it has every Victorian feel about it, apart from the fact that Queen Victoria had by then died. So all the Victober people have already switched this video off.
I'm sure they'd never dare.
And finally, via a subscriber who happened to be reading this as well, I give you The Black Hand by... what's the guy's name? Arthur Reeve, The Black Hand. And this is in neither prompt because it's a story of Craig Kennedy, scientific detective. So it's later than the Victorian era. It's Victober, not long 19th century Tober. So even though there's sort of a commonality to those all these years, doesn't really count for that, and science isn't occultism, although they blurred into each other. And I've heard about this Craig Kennedy scientific detective. Never read any stories, so it was great opportunity to get one of the books. It was issued as a 2-shilling fiction, I think, maybe more, by Everly Nash. So it's an American book, but this was an English edition. Psychic Reminiscences. Sorry, like a lot of old books, there's a catalogue at the back for the other things they publish. And they can be quite interesting because usually there's like stuff that's like now really famous, stuff you've never heard of, and stuff that kind of gives a bit of sort of context, so people were still interested in psychic stuff, for instance. The Married Life of Anne of Austria. Well, I hadn't been losing any sleep about that, but...
Well, you need to.
Yeah, The Mystery of Nine by William LeQueur. Author of Hushed Up, etc., etc. The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. Whoa, now there's a book. Ha! It's the weirdest and one of the most difficult to read books ever. See how they're selling it. The Nightland is a love story set about with stupendous desolation.
Great.
It is an attempt to tell the epic of the end and give a tremendous picture of the stand of the last millions of the humans in the last redoubt. Most of those words have got capitals. The hero, a man of exceptional gifts, believes his love to be in peril of annihilation by the evil forces and monsters that inhabit the wild night country, and he sets off alone into the Nightland to rescue her. Moving on to The Man Who Stroked Cats.
Just for a bit of a change of pace.
The very book we're reading, The Black Hand, 2-shilling fiction. Okay. These adventures have appeared serially in Nash's magazine, have been widely appreciated, many thinking them quite as good as the stories of Sherlock Holmes. Which does kind of tie all the detective ones together because, you know, really when it comes to detectives, Sherlock Holmes was like big man on campus, so people would tie into them in various ways. Anyway, the book's called The Black Hand, but it's short stories. Sorry, I've got a question from the floor.
Point of information, Mr. Chair. What connection is there between the Black Hand and the Black Hand gang?
In real life?
What is the Black Hand gang?
Well, there's a Bulldog Drummond novel called The Black Gang.
No.
In this, the Black Hand organisation is basically the mafia.
Oh, right.
So it's in New York, they're extorters, and their calling card is a black hand. So you got the symbolism, but without the actual occultism. And Craig Kennedy is like a professor who solves crimes with his scientific things. And in this, it's like basically electronic bugging, which is like, what's so good about that? But, well, it's 1912, isn't it? So it's like, this is like a complete fantasy, and how they introduce the microphone into where the things are going down. It's all very clever, and
like
yeah,
that Canadian thing.
pretty brisk, nice story. Yes, it's a bit like the Murdoch Mysteries.
Murdoch
yes,
Mysteries.
Exactly. Except this was like at the time rather than now. So 5 hands. Keeping me going with the challenges of the month. I'll be back in a bit with something else.
More hands.